Creating something that didn't exist before is quite cool. Starting a business and creating it and building a team and a brand and customers and a business and revenue is quite exciting when you can look back and say, before I did this, that didn't exist. It's quite creative. You could go looking for things, but you could just be open to them. And I think that's probably my mantra in life, would just be open to opportunities and then be ready to commit. Often I think not making a decision is equal to making a decision, because you're potentially missing things and saying no to them without even realising you've done that. It all starts with
Steve Merchant.
He co-founded Pet Doctors, New Zealand's largest network of community-based veterinary clinics.
He pivoted into tech, founding ClinicWise, the world's first AI-powered digital assistant designed for vet clinics.
What have been the most inspired decisions that you've made?
buying my first practice, for instance. It would have been easy to look at the opportunity and say, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to run a business. I barely know how to be a vet. I say, you can learn that. I do see with a lot of people that talk to me about having great ideas, they'll turn it around and they'll say, I could never afford to do X, Y, Z. And I've always turned that around and say, just focus on the fact. If it's a good idea, then if you can get it for the right price.
What's the worst decision you've made in business?
I think probably getting involved with...
Quick one, Mina here. Thank you for watching this episode. I appreciate you. Thank you for all your support. One thing that you can do for me is to please hit the subscribe button below. I promise you that if you hit subscribe, I'm going to work hard to make sure that my episodes are really good, that will get better and better. So, do we have a deal? Okay, back to the episode. Steve, welcome to the podcast. You know exactly what it's like to start something from scratch and trying to make something work. How did you even, there's a presentation that we've just had. People might have had a glimpse of who you are. Maybe people don't know who you are. The question is, I sometimes ask my guests, why would they stick around to the end of the episode and watch this conversation? Why do you think it's people need to listen to Steve Merchant? What has he got to say?
Yeah, what's interesting, I think everybody would take a different perspective on what I say and what I've learned. I'm happy to share my story. Certainly not an expert in anything, but I'm endlessly curious and can see opportunities. And I think sometimes starting something, creating something that didn't exist before you, a business is quite cool. Starting a business and creating it and building a team and a brand and customers and a business and revenue is quite exciting when you can look back and say, before I did this, that didn't exist. It's quite creative, I think. So.
And you were the reason why it happened.
Yeah. Well, so there's always got to be a business case, and so you're identifying an opportunity, or you're seeing an issue developed. You potentially know the market, and then you bring whatever you need. In my case, it's often technology, but it all starts with the market and the opportunity, and seeing actually something can be built and created to actually achieve a purpose and to a customer, basically.
So you've been running for about 30 years in business.
Yeah. I think I graduated as a vet, and I was young and eager, but possibly a wee bit restless. But I think I actually purchased my own clinic 4 years after I graduated, which is probably not how it's normally done now. But to me, mixing my passion, for veterinary medicine and people and clients and pets and business, I think I just jumped into that first opportunity I saw. And often I had a friend of mine that always talked about just being prepared for opportunities. So actually you could go looking for things, but you could just be open to them. And I think that's probably my mantra in life, would just be open to opportunities and then be ready to commit. Often I think not making a decision is equal to making a decision, because you're potentially missing things and saying no to them without even realising you've done that. So
I loved that you talked about decisions, because we discussed that in the podcast. This is an entrepreneurship podcast. It's people who are listening right now could be an entrepreneur just starting out, or they've been running for about 5 years, or they're thinking about wanting to be in business. So they would be interested to find out from you and me too, your decision making. So you just told me that you bought a practice 4 years after registering as a vet. And then you went on to become quite an iconic, creating an iconic brand, which is Pet Doctors in New Zealand. So if you think back over your experiences and your business dealings, what have been the most inspired decisions that you've made that you look back and go, I'm so glad I made that decision? And I want to delve into that decision.
Yeah, I think possibly not being buying my first practice, for instance, it would have been easy to look at the opportunity and say, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to run a business. I barely know how to be a vet. And everything that comes with running a business. You can learn that. You can learn to be a vet. You can learn to run a business. And then I think probably the lesson was to say, I think I'd love to do this. What I do see with a lot of people that talk to me about having great ideas, they'll turn it around and they'll say, I could never afford to do X, Y, Z. I'd love to do it, but I could never afford to do it. And I've always turned that around and say, look, if it's a good idea, just focus on the fact, if it's a good idea, then put the affordability to one side, because if it's a good idea, then and if you can get it for the right price, so that's the second discussion, there's always going to be some sort of cost. How you finding a way to pay for it? It's a trillion ways to actually do a deal if you wanted to. So I think I'd back it up and never actually put obstacles in the way if it's passion, and if you think the timing's right, and if you think it's a great idea, then actually focus on that first. Don't worry about how you're going to resource it, how you're going to learn. I mean, you'll have to consider those things, but actually they're a lot easier to consider once you're passionate about the idea and you can start seeing the opportunity.
What is it for you that helped you, get in there? Like, I can learn how to run. I don't know how to run a business. I don't know how to blah blah blah. But you did it anyway. Yeah.
I was thinking, how hard can it be?
It's
I don't know. I think you often put obstacles in the way. Like currently, I'm running an AI business vertical, and I mean, nobody knew what AI and Gen AI was when I started. So nobody could pretend to know everything about the business I'm in. Yeah. Even though I knew less than most when we started, I'm learning as fast as the whole world is. So I think and getting good people around you. Like I've somebody that I lean on a lot was a great people person when it came to human resource, managing people, managing cultures, workplace, sorting out issues, just creating a really good environment, and looking after your people. So I've worked closely with a colleague that I met at a seminar, probably 20 pre-pet doctors, who's still working with me now in a couple of our current instances. And so anything that I need to know around, whether it be employment law, contract law, keeping up to date, or culture, or assimilating cultures, I can rely on her. So you do get a cohort of really good people around you, and I think stay open to those people, because those networks will come back. It amazes me what a small world it is when you're in a profession or a niche, but it's a small country. I mean, you keep coming across the same people in various guises, and if you've got good relationships and people you can trust, then bring them on board. You don't have to have all the answers yourself. You need to be able to, at the end of the day, lead a team and a vision, and actually, the people will come around you. Because
you've pioneered the, you started Pet Doctors, and I want to find out what inspired you to move from being a vet to practicing or running now a nationwide, what would you call it, group? And also Indie Vet, you have founded that.
Yeah, so we've exited Pet Doctors. So I think when I look back at my career, I bought that first practice quite quickly, and then if I had a regret, I would probably say I maybe spent. We had a great practice and a great team, and I just I enjoyed it, and we had great clients, and I raised a family. But that was probably 15 years. I just did that. And I shouldn't say just, because you're running a practice and growing it and turning it from a branch practice into a 2 to 3 FTE vet practice with veterinary nurses and reception. I think that's great. But then I got going. Then the person that I bought that practice from was selling their other practice, and so I just happened into that. And then, it's a lot easier buying your second business than buying your first one. And then it's even easier again buying your third. And then I sort of got on a roll. And that led into being more curious around business. So I look back at those years, and I certainly learned how to be a really good vet and running a veterinary business, I think. But I think I would have liked to have started on the I wasn't an entrepreneur then. I was a vet, so I was always entrepreneurial. But I think I probably, as a lot of us do, you just sort of get buried in life and everything else that's going on. So it'd be nice to have had started what I've been doing since 10 years earlier. You always think if you'd done it sooner and faster, then maybe bigger and better, or not. There's definitely a timing thing.
Going back to decisions, you were talking about the best decision. What was one of the worst decisions you've made?
I think actually, for me, and it depends on your wiring, but definitely for me, the first decision was buying owning my own business and my own destiny, and saying, okay, I don't know how this is going to work, and I'm taking some risks here, but I at least it's me. It's up to me now, and if I fail, I fail. But I think I would have got bored if I hadn't done that reasonably quickly, and just learning through, you get all the punches and the complaints and the issues that any employer and any business would have, and just dealing with those, dealing with banks, dealing with creditors, dealing with the whole mix. So I think that was definitely the first decision. But it was almost, in my mind, it's interesting, because I think sometimes things are right and you just do them, and you don't even notice you're making a decision. In my mind, it's often the hardest decisions are the ones where you actually say, no, I'm saying no to this because it feels like the right thing to do, but potentially, I won't do that.
What's the worst decision you've made in business?
The what, sorry?
Worst.
I think probably getting involved with the wrong people, and that's, I don't mean that that there's anything wrong with those people. It's just that you need to be aligned, and it's like if you have somebody in a business, and it could be yourself, but if you don't have an aligned culture and you have people around you that are pulling you one way and you're trying to take the business another way, then I think that old mantra of taking your time before you actually commit to bringing people on side, I think is just making sure that there's a compatibility there.
If you look back at that decision, was it that you haven't done your due diligence, your thinking through? What was it that made it a bad decision, like the anatomy of a bad decision?
Yeah, sometimes I think it is just not working through the process. So you have to look at, okay, this looks good, it all sounds okay, but actually taking a bit more time, maybe taking a little bit of advice around the decision you're going to make, especially if it's a partnership in a business. I've seen, and not just personally, but I've seen a lot of partnerships bust up, and they can be soul destroying, and they can ruin the business and the venture. And then when you look back and you talk it through, there's often warning signs of incompatibility or drivers in different directions. People at different stages in their life or with different outcomes. The classic thing is, and I'm advising another business at the moment where two people have got together and they're agreeing on everything, and so that they can't see the need to have a shareholders agreement. And I've pointed out, well, now's the time to actually get a shareholders agreement and make sure you are aligned, because it's not now when you're agreeing on everything that you actually need this. It's down the track and there could be third parties involved. Somebody might want to sell, so you need to be able to spend that time making sure that you're on the same page. Like exit's the classic one. I'm in this business for life, whereas your partner might be thinking, actually, no, I just want to turn this over in 2 years' time and expand. And they're fundamentally different ways that you're going to live and treat the business.
Is that what happened for you? I mean, I love real examples. I know sometimes can be a bit tricky talking about business when, especially if things have not turned out so well and you want to protect the people involved. But would there be perhaps a different decision that you've made that you are able to think about real examples of really what happened? You're thinking, I wanted to buy another clinic and I went and bought it, and then I regretted that later because my financial thing wasn't going on really well. Like I needed to wait 6 more months before. There's these kind of things. I think people they really learn from real experiences, and I'm fascinated and curious to know, for someone like you who has pet doctors, like you've founded it and you exited it now, there must have been moments where you were scaling and maybe you went too fast or maybe you went too slow.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So there's definitely some key decision points along the way. And it wasn't, there was, I had a group of clinics in Auckland. I had a colleague who we shared similar philosophy around practice, who had two practices in Wellington. So we got together and we co-founded Pet Doctors. And then we brought out, so we ended up with a group, Auckland and Wellington.
Right.
And then we jointly with another colleague set up a clinic in Christchurch. So all of a sudden we were national, like from zero to national within a couple of weeks. I'd already done some business planning, and we'd identified the fact that there's going to be more vets wanting to sell soon than there were vets wanting to buy.
How did you know that?
I could just see it happening, and
what was happening that you were like, this is a trend?
Well, there was I still remember one of the practices we bought just summed it up perfectly. He was he was probably late 40s. It was a semi-rural practice, nice clinic in town, and he'd been there since he was in his late 20s, and he had colleagues that he used to employ that were graduates, and he always thought, well, actually, one of these will stay and I'll be able to sell my practice to them one day. And they were all 5 to 10 years younger than him. And then 10 years later, he was in his late 30s, and these vets were still in their 20s. And then 10 years later, he was in his late 40s, and these vets were still in their 20s. There's a change in demographic of vets. Vets, the whole profession had shifted from a very male profession to a very female profession, with a lot of the accent and also reputation for not being a high-earning profession, and a lot of vets working flexible hours and raising families, so that the vets in the practice it was a vocation, they were passionate, they were great vets, but they weren't necessarily in there to own a business anymore. So he woke up one day and said, I'm never going to be able to sell my business to my, the traditional way would have been like I bought my practice off my boss. He really, it dawned on him one day that he needs to go. He deserves to be able to exit, and that's his asset that he's built up. That's equivalent to a super fund. And there was nobody that he could see to sell to. So hence, what we're often called the roll-ups or the corporates. So we had, alongside that, developed a model where we could say, okay, well, come to us. We can make this easy, and we can take on your practice, and we can look after your teams and preserve your legacy and take it forward and give you an opportunity to exit. And I guess one of my learnings along the way is just be careful about that, because a lot of what I've noticed is, I'm not necessarily here to talk about exiting in business, but a lot of people exit a business, they leave it too late. I think one of the first things you should do when you're starting up a business is have a think about how you're going to get out. Because whether it's in a year or 10 years or 15 years, there's a process there, and you don't want to stay there too long, because that's not doing yourself or your team or your clients any favours. And so where we did get unstuck was if we were talking to a practice that was desperate to sell, but they were just too desperate to sell because they were burnt, they were worn out. It's time to go. And then often where that can trip you up is if you don't do your due diligence on the business that you're buying and find out that actually it's not going to run like you thought it was going to run, it's not going to assimilate, there's some cultural differences, it's just not going to be a good fit for your business and your group. And so I think the colleague I was talking about prior, she became even more instrumental in just assessing, if you're bringing a new business or a new team into your existing business, you've got to look at what it's going to look like when the person that's selling it is gone, because they'll promise you the world, but when they're gone, they're gone. You know, they wake up on Monday and they've paid their mortgage off and they've got their check. It's quite a different driver for them. So does that business still make sense down the track? And having to do your homework around that, I would advise taking some time.
And I think what really stood out too from what you're saying is knowing those trends, knowing what's going on in the demographic, the way things used to be back then. How do you know these things? Do you just have chats with people, just chats with vets? And for people listening going, I need to know about my industry, how do I do that?
Yeah, well, probably one of the best things that I did in that 15 years I talked about when I was practicing, I went to vet meetings, I went to vet conferences, I talked to vets, I talked to vets that were practice owners.
So getting out there.
Yeah, I was getting out there. But I was just talking, and shouldn't say just, but I had I had more insight into the sector and my niche, and that could be any business that you're in. I remember thinking I need to do some business training. Should I do an MBA? And then I thought, well, it didn't feel right. I'm not climbing a commercial ladder. So I happened to network in and ended up doing an owner-manager program at the Ice House. And that was about 20 years ago now. And that was mind-blowing for me, because all of a sudden I wasn't talking to vets. The whole construct of those groups is the residential cohort that leads you through with the same bunch of 20 people. You're all in different industries for two reasons. One is you can share without feeling that you've got competitors in the room. But two, all of a sudden you realise that actually all these business issues are much the same, So you had the ability to step outside of your niche and your profession and look back in. And that's often when you can identify trends and articulate them that are just washing around you. You just often don't see them until you step out and look at them from a distance. So I think I got to know the trends in our industry better by sort of stepping out of it and creating a business plan and testing it on other people who didn't know the industry. And that's where I basically wrote the business plan for succession planning opportunities. Because the classic was, what's going to happen to all these vets? They're all going to retire and it's going to be a disaster. And I'm sitting thinking, well, hang on a minute, there's got to be an opportunity there, which is really how Pet Doctors started. And
well, I want to zoom in on the Ice House experience, because there you could have gone to any course or business advisory. There's so many business advisors right now. Obviously, Ice House is it's a entrepreneurship hub to go and learn how to become an entrepreneur and grow your business and develop a community. Why did you choose that avenue? Because if someone going and listening, I don't know, I've got so many options to choose from. How do I know where to go get advice and training from?
Well, I think the first, and I could have stepped past it, but the first thing the Ice House will teach you to do is separate yourself from the business, at least at some, because you get caught up, and I spent 15 years getting caught up in the business. Yeah. Just actually step back, create some structure and space in your month or your day. Just one evening a month, step out of the business and have a look at it. And the best way to do that is to get a mentor or somebody, and they can talk about the business to you. They can ask questions, you can answer them, you can make a commitment to following up and doing things, and then it's minuted, and then a month later you catch up and you're being held to account. You're pulled back out of the business, and then you can spend the rest of the time back in the business again. And so you could do that. And I had to go and do an Ice House course to learn to do that. But it was just the right time for me, in that it was the program I did was specifically for people like me. It was people who were running a business, they had the opportunity to scale, and who were in control of the decisions and the destiny of that business. I wasn't for, it was for owner-operators basically. So it was quite focused on what I was doing. It was for owner-operators with a business about my size who wanted to take it the next step and basically had no business training. So I think it was really immersive, and I've talked to other people about doing similar things now. Just getting outside of your comfort zone and your, you need to do professional development if you're a, dentist, doctor, vet, or in anything. But you do spend a lot of time with the people you spend a lot of time with, and I think it is good to break out of that and actually talk to other people. And you'll see there's so much similarity. There's so much similar, the issues are similar across a lot of businesses. But you'll also start looking at your own landscape and environment through different eyes if you start talking about it to other people.
And I'm sure you made relationships and friendships there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm still involved with them. One of the mentors that I had there became involved in the business and is still involved in some of the businesses that we're running. So it's certainly opens your eyes and just presents some opportunity, and I think I liked it too from a New Zealand perspective. It was very focused on success and making successful businesses scale and actually helping us as a nation, internationally, which appealed to me.
I want to zone in now on, because if someone is listening who's just starting out, and whether you're just starting out, you wanting to get the basics right, your foundations and things like that. And there's some people who understand that and are scaling, and I want to get to the scaling challenges because, as pet doctors expanded in New Zealand, you have had to come across something unforeseen. Like you've had something would have come up your way and gone, gosh, I didn't see that coming. And I want to get into that. But with pet doctors, how did you market your group and made it look really enticing for people to get involved, whether it's an investment or vets being part of the group and the brand?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it depends on where you are in the market. When we were doing what we were doing, there was nobody else doing it. So we became known as the acquirers of choice quite quickly because there wasn't a lot of other people doing it. So our differentiation was more focused on So one of the key decisions we had to make was if we're bringing a bunch of clinics in different cultures and different towns and different communities into a group, one of the tensions was, do we call them all pet doctors for a start? Can you walk? Is it like McDonald's? You walk into a pet doctors in Howick and it's the same as a pet doctors in Waihi. Should it be the same, or should they be reflective of the practice that it was? Or the other extreme is actually you just pretend they're not a group. All of the consolidation is done behind the scenes. So that's a fundamental question, which is specific to that situation. I'm not sure we actually completely ever resolved that, because that's an internal tension. And then you look at, well, okay, we can scale easier if everything's the same in every practice. So even if we decided to create a lot of individuality and differentiation between all the practices, it potentially made it harder to scale. So one of those tensions again is scaling can limit the amount of difference that there is between your businesses as you grow them.
I want to get a fact check right now. Is it a franchise, Pet Doctors, or is it not? No.
So Pet Doctors, no. We owned all the practices.
Right.
Yeah. So
and you wouldn't share the ownership with the vet that was.
Yes. Yeah, so we did.
You did. Okay.
Because we weren't a well-funded group of individuals when we started up. We had our own practices, but so we had to look at it. And as I pointed out, I think I made a comment earlier. We thought it was a great idea. How we were actually going to buy lots of clinics wasn't the first consideration. It was, let's do this because it needs to be done and somebody needs to do it. So we ended up getting bank funding on board along the way, which is interesting when you start scaling, and a few margin points can make a big difference to funding and financials. When you've got a small business, the variances aren't as big. As you multiply those out and put a zero after them, it can get quite scary. So, but one of the ways of doing it was attracting like-minded vets. So a classic way would be, there was a practice that wanted to sell, and there might have been two partners in there. One of them might have wanted to retire, and the other might have said, no, I want part of what you're doing. So part of their deal would be get shares in the wider group. So we ended up with a big group of shareholders that a lot of them were ex-practice owners who'd sort of transferred their equity from their smaller practice to a bigger group. It's always an investment, friendly sector. So it's always useful to be in a sector that's viewed kindly by the investment community. And so that we had quite quickly, we were under the watch of venture capital, private equity. They were just keeping an eye on us. And so the halfway through our journey, we were sort of approached and did get investment funds from private equity from a fund, which was interesting because I had no relationship or exposure before, but learning to operate in a more structured funded environment. And as a founder and a CE, and an entrepreneur, watch what happens to you once you start getting investment funds on board. It's actually quite an interesting journey in itself on focusing and making sure that you're all aligned with the same story. Yeah, so we owned the whole. The other thing that I mentioned before was that you've always got to be focused on scale, and like if we wanted to scale, so we had to think about, okay, a consolidated simple ownership structure was easier to scale, and it was also easier to get funding for, and ultimately it was easier to exit if we had one ownership structure rather than lots of different variable ownership structures. So one of the first things we had to do when we ended up with private equity on board was actually just assimilate and streamline all of the ownership into one big structure rather than having minority partners all around the place. So no, it's not. It wasn't a franchise. And then when we exited, we ended up being bought by an Australian ASX company, and then they've done what they've on sold it since then, and it's done what it's done. In fact, they have decided to debrand it, which, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the decisions that we had to make. So you won't see the name as much as you used to.
Quick one. Mina here. Thank you for watching this episode. I appreciate you. Thank you for all your support. One thing that you can do for me is to please hit the subscribe button below. I promise you that if you hit subscribe, I'm going to work hard to make sure that my episodes are really good, that will get better and better. So, do we have a deal? Okay, back to the episode.
Talking about scaling, some of the strategic decisions what were they that were pivotal for that significant impact on your scaling of pet doctors?
I think having the funding to scale, I think, was important because, as I say, we weren't well funded initially, and that meant that we potentially compromised some of the, we were potentially creating scenarios and complexity in our ownership structure that was going to be harder to scale. So getting private equity on board enabled us to do two things. Actually, have a pretty simple model. We had an armory of resource available to us, so we could just go out and buy more cleanly. And one of the pivotal things that we did was actually, first thing we did was bring on a good commercial CFO into the business. So because it's, the key accountants are great, but they're very historical, and they'll do tax returns and they'll advise you. But when you're starting to scale and you're starting to make decisions, and you really want somebody that's sitting alongside you real time, who can actually start advising you on the impact of those decisions. So if you do X, this is what that's going to look like in 2 years' time. and it could take you down or it might not take you down. So just somebody who knows the business ultimately and can start forecast and modelling so that you can go with your gut as an entrepreneur and make the right decisions, but you've got some wise hands sitting alongside you saying, hang on a minute, that's probably the wrong thing to do and don't do that.
I just get the image of being in a boat and there's two people on the control deck. One is steering the wheel or steering the ship, and the other person is like not in it. It's just looking ahead going, yep, we're going to go there, we're going to go there. You almost need that when you get really big.
Yeah. I think if I look at the key people that were around me, apart from your co-founders and your colleagues, it would be somebody who can really guide you through culture, because I was talking to somebody the other day who said you set your culture with the first person that you employ. You set your culture in your business on day one, and the way you start treating your team and the expectations and your values that you set, you take those forward, and if you start with 5 people and you end up with 500, then you can't leave it till the end. So you need to keep in mind creating a team and creating a culture and making sure everyone's aligned. So and more so when you're bringing in new businesses. So with a roll-up like Pet Doctors, it's very much about bringing in, these were teams that have been in communities working for owners for 20 years, and all of a sudden this crowd from Auckland to Wellington were turning up, and so I think being able to merge those cultures and keep everybody happy and talk to them and give them time. One of the person I was talking about said one of the key messages is that change is very, very much different if it's done to you rather than done by you. So if people are wanting to change, then that's easy, but if you're making them change, there's some resistance, even if it's the same change. So just giving them time to do that. And having a commercial CFO sitting beside you, which is somebody that's got a track record of making commercial decisions in a bigger business, and potentially a business that's bigger than yours. So if you can get somebody alongside you who knows what it looks like on the other side, and they can see you around now, and they can actually start advising you on, don't go that way because there's a storm brewing over there, go that way, so that's critical. So I think people and commercial finance, having those people alongside you. And now the key word is fractional. You don't need to wait till you can pay $300,000 or $400,000 a year for a CFO. You can get them for a few $1,000s a month. There's a lot now, and I'd say bring them in and get them close, and they can grow with you. So getting those people on side is good. Even if you think you know everything, it's good to have those people beside you as early as possible.
Indeed. And I want to find out from you maybe like a real bad mistake that you made in business.
Yeah.
And what did it teach you?
Yeah, it's because you've asked me that a couple of times, and I don't, I think you learn from things, and you might have made different decisions, but have I made mistakes in business? I guess it depends on your view of a mistake. I mean, I've made businesses.
It's actually difficult to admit a mistake sometimes, and especially if it's cost you quite a lot.
The worst one would be, just getting involved with people that potentially, you shouldn't have. And that's not about them. It's about they shouldn't have got involved with me, and so that can be disappointing,
Earlier in the day, I think if this specific mistake is when you were in the early phase of business, you were just starting out and,
Yeah, I think probably not going with my gut. And also not, and I think the mistake depends on, you have to understand your own failings. So I think I might tend to see stuff ahead of time and get involved early, but I don't stick with it long enough.
Right.
So occasionally it doesn't work and you get bored, and then you find that 5 years later somebody's done it and the timing's better. Or they stuck with it for longer, and that idea has now really got legs. And potentially, if I had just kept doing that, and it may have ended up in a better result. So I think that's definitely a learning, whether it's a mistake or whether it's just indicative of being entrepreneurial and potentially jumping around a wee bit.
Yeah.
So I think being prepared to put the necessary time into a business. I think entrepreneurs will always underestimate how long it takes to actually get something out there and up there, and actually you hear about all the success stories, but they're often 5, 7, 8, 10-year journeys. They don't happen in a year, and so you need to stick with them for a while,
for some time.
Yeah, and give them the focus they deserve. I think I've made mistakes in the past by having a great idea, like a classic would have been. In those years before I had my own practice, there was no national brand in the veterinary world, and I thought there should be. And the easiest way to do that is to do it virtually. So we set up an e-com business called Pet Post, and it was almost pre-internet, and it was just a sideline. It was we put together a flyer, like a catalogue. We put it inside New Zealand magazines, put it inside this listener, posted 100,000 around the country. There was a fax form in the middle, so I used to come into work in the mornings and there was faxes all over the waiting room floor ordering food with credit card and all the stuff that we had in the clinic. So we employed a relative in the garage, used to pack these parcels and ship them out. And I was...
What are they? What's
like dog food.
Yeah.
So it was the first national e-com business, and it was 1997, I think we launched that. But it seemed like a great idea, and it was, but it was very much something I ran alongside owning a vet practice in South Auckland. If I'd actually, probably the lesson there was actually that had the potential to be a far bigger business than the practice in South Auckland. And we had probably a 10-year head start on the rest of the country in that respect, and treated it as a sideline, as an interest when it deserved a lot more focus and investment and time.
And what happened to it?
It got rolled up into the Pet Doctors Group, and so we kept it going. There's a mistake when we exited Pet Doctors. They took that business as well, but they didn't value it and they didn't pay us for it, and we accepted that as well. It's not our core business. Within a month, they'd sold it for quite a lot of money. So that's a mistake. So,
how would you do that differently then?
We would have not included it in just been a wee bit firmer around in the sales. And actually, we're not selling that. There's,
why did you accept selling it then?
Because it was we had the same marketing teams sort of running a bit of that and running a bit of that. So it was complicated to peel it out. Yeah. And arguably you could say that, we got, if we were happy with the deal we got, on behalf of all the shareholders, and whether it included Pet Post or not, then I guess, in effect you could argue we did get paid for it, but there was still zero sum on the sheet. I remember that, and but then it was nice to see it continue, and I think it's slowly been wrapped up inside one of the other big brands now.
How many Pet Doctors clinics did you end up having right before you sold it? It
was over 30, and we ended up having the e-com business as well.
Yep.
And then we had another veterinary related e-com business that we sort of scaled back a wee bit, and a veterinary nurse training school. And along the way, before Pet Doctors, I actually co-founded. We had an issue getting good veterinary nurses who wanted to work in practice. There was a shortage of them, and we felt that the vet nurse training institutions at Polytechs and Unitechs, they weren't necessarily training veterinary nurses to work in practice. They were training them to work in zoos or to be in academia, or just because people wanted to be a vet nurse. So we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could train our own nurses to actually be great nurses for practices and really employable. And prior to that, I was looking at maybe importing veterinary techs from the US and giving them a working holiday, because they're not weren't paid very well in the US, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. So we thought we could actually, in NZ dollars, we could create working holidays. And so we were half by investigating bringing nurses in from the US to as like an employment opportunity. And then we thought, well, actually, why don't we just start up a vet nurse school out of nothing? So I co-founded that with a friend who was a vet nurse tutor. We went to a couple of the companies and asked for sponsorship. I think it was a flea company at the time, and they said, yep. And so it was completely unfunded. We, the students had to pay, they couldn't get any student loans, and we did it at the back of one of our clinics, and they ended up with 10 students in 2005, I think. So that grew and grew and grew, and then we had an Albany campus and a botany campus, and then it started to get funding, and so then.
How do you get time to do all of that when you have this group of clinics and you're practicing and it's running so much?
It was easier once you actually have more businesses, it's actually easier to spend time doing that stuff. I found when you're working in the business and you've got one business and you've structured the business so it's completely dependent on you, by default, if you end up with 2 to 3 businesses, you can't work in all of them. So you need to have more people around you. So getting good people in to free you up to actually start being able to look at those opportunities. Stuff. Yeah. So I guess that was one of my learnings was if I should have freed myself up from you need to know your business well. So you need to be able to get in there and be able to work in every part of it, as they say. But, it's not, you're not doing your people and your clients a favour, I think, if you bury yourself in that and you're not looking at where you can take the business and the opportunities that sit there.
Are you saying that the faster you employ people or get contractors on board to help you do the job so you can step out, the better?
You need to take some time out of your business. It's said so often, it sounds trite, but work on your business. You need to be able to spend time on your business and less time in your business. Yeah. And it's a really hard thing, when you're starting up. But as I said, one of the ways is just pick one evening a week and take a friend out for a drink or a dinner and actually talk about your business and get them to hold you to account and check in that the month later that you've done the stuff you said you were doing. Just little things like that, or get a manager in, get a general manager, a practice manager, so you just start to share that responsibility. Because it's sometimes it's a control thing. You just don't want to let other people do stuff because it's easy to do it yourself, is the classic line. Interesting you talk about scaling pet doctors, because in the back of my mind we ended up with 35 clinics
before you sold it.
Well,
can I just ask the value of the business? How big did it get in terms of revenue?
It would have been 30, if we're looking at the e-com and the vet nurse training, it would have been $40 million per annum. It's not huge, but it's, it's one of the bigger groups in the country.
Yeah.
There are some quiet, there are some other entities in the rural, farm practice that tended to have possibly bigger revenue, but there's a lot of retail involved with those, so potentially the margins might be less, but they might have had more.
And how did you make sure that you had good margins?
A good CFO, and I learned that actually early on. This is probably an example of just looking at opportunities inside the business. I remember we had a quiet afternoon, and so I was looking at my database, my practice management system, and I was just curious, what's the thing I sell the most of? And it tended to be in, I can't remember what the item was, but we sold about 10,000 of them a year. And I think they were about $2 each, $2.50 each, I thought. And I thought, for no good reason, nobody had told me that they needed to be $2.50 each, or so I thought, well, what if I put the price up by 50 cents? And so I did, and it took me half an hour to have that thought, and then I thought I'd wait and look for any fallout, but no, nobody mentioned. Often the biggest resistance you get is from your team saying, we need to discount this. But the value of that item was still affordable and it was still seen of value. And from the business perspective, so that half an hour had made me $5,000 a year. So just
half an hour thought.
Sitting there for half an hour with
I
nothing
had a
better
half
to
an
do.
hour thought, and it gained me $5,000 a year.
Yeah, so it's just like tinkering
It's 'cause
around
you
the edges of your business. So
Yeah.
So I think often looking at your margin. So when and this applies to any business, I think you don't want to lose. I mean, you can give people discounts and you can give money away, but one of my mantras was, well, never just give money away or discount a service without making sure the customer knows. It's very, at least get some. You have to do it, and there's some things that are lost leaders, but at least try and make sure the customer knows that you're doing them a deal here. But just look after your margins at a low level. As long as your margins are okay at a low level, so at a granular level, and that's often like that. You set it up, you get it right, and then you've got a system in place, whether it's a practice management system or some software that just looks after that. So that you've set that this is the cost. You've looked after wastage. Here's your margin, and that's sorted. So that that all of those units, the margin that you're making on them is going to help pay your wages and your investment and your facility and buying a new machine. But you're not losing money when that walks out the door. So if you do that to all parts of the business, then that your margins are okay. So you can't just look at your margins in your business and say they're great. Our margin's 70%. You need to break it down to each item ideally, and it doesn't have to be you as the owner, but just make sure that there's a discipline in there that stuff's not walking out the door, and you're losing money on an item without knowing that you're losing money on an item. And then the margins will look after themselves.
Yeah, and you had to step out of had to really think about something before that was possible. You wouldn't have been able to get that fixed without having that half-hour thought.
True. Yeah, but I gave myself, I had the time, so I was spending some time on the
mental capacity.
Yeah, on the time, because when I think of in the business, it's like I was seeing clients. But it's interesting with the scale thing, because right at the outset, we knew there's about 450 practices in the country, and so and a big bunch of them were rural and a big bunch were farm clubs. So we knew that potentially the practices that might become available to us was always going to be about 40 or 50 maybe. But when we're looking at scale, in my mind, it was a great thing to do, and we built great teams, and we had a great brand. But it wasn't super exciting, because it's like we were on the journey and we did a good job compared to what my new iteration is now. There's an abundance. It's like we could grow these practices and build a bigger group. But I guess before we got to the end of that, I was getting a little bit restless, thinking, but then what? What was happening alongside was there was overseas entrants coming in. So there's 3 groups of 15 that were overseas roll-ups, and then we had 30 or 40. So they were all each one of those 3 was trying to buy us, and then they'd be the biggest by a long way. And so...
Quick one. Mina here. Thank you for watching this episode. I appreciate you. Thank you for all your support. One thing that you can do for me is to please hit the subscribe button below. I promise you that if you hit subscribe, I'm going to work hard to make sure that my episodes are really good, that will get better and better. So, do we have a deal? Okay, back to the episode.
How did you stay competitive? Because you had competitors, I'm sure.
Yeah, so being competitive, so that we had 2 customers, I guess, identifying it was, if you wanted to sell your practice, well, come to us and not to these guys. So we had to try and have a good brand and reputation.
And a brand awareness. How did you have the brand awareness? That's buzzword right now.
Yeah, it was pretty easy, because we were first to the market, and everybody, people were just assuming that
you can see the sun on the road.
Yeah, and your internal networks. Yeah. So I think we wanted to try and make sure that And, people could argue that we got it right or wrong, but we wanted to make sure we provided a good environment for vets and veterinary nurses and teams to work in. So so that's your word of mouth. Nobody would want, if I owned a business and I was going to sell it to pet doctors and everyone said, but they're a nightmare employers, we don't want to work there.
Yeah.
That was never going to work. So we had to...
So you had to sort
have
out
a good
your reputation.
Yeah, and an internal level. And we were more focused on that than from a customer-facing thing, which probably asks the question, why have a brand? Is it an internal brand that was important, or was it like, I'm going to a pet doctor's clinic with my cat because I've heard they were great vets? I don't think that really works so well in the veterinary market. I think people tend to form relationships with their local vets, and it's at a very personal level, not so much a brand level, would be my feeling.
Yeah.
So the pet doctor's brand, in my mind, was more about an internal brand. It was about us as acquirers and employers, as opposed to being a front-facing brand to the consumer. But I'm not sure we ever, as a team, as directors, really actually ever settled that discussion.
So there's two school of thought. It's the external brand versus the internal brand.
Yeah. So
internal,
getting
service.
back the external brand, should you be able to walk into a pet doctor's in Christchurch and know this looks like pet doctors?
Yeah. The McDonald effect.
Yeah.
You know what you're getting.
And there's an argument for that, but there's also an argument against that. So.
And you moved on to doing a lot more later in terms of technology and AI, and we now have an AI agent that's a vet nurse, or not a vet doctor, but a vet nurse. Where did you see that opportunity come through, and how did you start it?
It's interesting. I've always been interested in technology. I was utilising a fax machine to create orders overnight when, the team we were all in bed at home with our families and kids, and there was a fax machine generating, revenue overnight onto the waiting room floor. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so we were pretty quick to adopt. We were one of the first practices to adopt get a computer and go paperless, which was a big thing. One of the practice management systems that is used around Australasia we were their first client, I think, and we used to get floppy disk upgrades into our machines. They were the big fat disks. I forgot what they were. So I've always been interested in technology.
Yeah.
And we did a veterinary comm dropship solution. And when you get private equity and serious funding on board, once you start getting partners, then you start becoming accountable. And as an entrepreneur, it's often slightly uncomfortable because you have to, if you're a CE and an entrepreneur and a founder, then you start to, as a CE, become the representative. You're the glue between the board and the private equity and the shareholders and the employees. And so your role becomes progressively more focused. And that means that some of the other wild ideas that you can have and the opportunities you see, you're just told, actually, no, by your CFO or by your board, focus, wind that down. My role became, after a while, just buy more clinics, get out there and be the front face of the brand as an acquirer, grow our EBIT, grow our, multiple, that sort of stuff. So when we exited, I was like a coiled spring, ready to jump off into doing all these random things again. And I think probably my lesson there is there's quite a difference in starting a company and growing it from zero to looking at something that's really, I take satisfaction out of looking at, well, here's something that didn't exist, now it exists, there's a great team, people doing a great job. I can actually get out of the way now and do something else. I think it's good to know if that's your point, because the people that, once you've done that, sometimes you're not the best leader anymore. Sometimes you're actually best to get out of the way and actually let somebody pick it up and keep going with it. So so the first thing, I was itching to do something that wasn't constrained by borders. So when we stopped Pet Doctors, I started saying, what could be bigger? I love technology. I know the sector really well. I know vets are more or less vets. around the world. Cocker Spaniel's a Cocker Spaniel, whether it's in Milwaukee or Manurewa. And I can see an opportunity to create a solution to start taking the pressure off them and actually bust out of not just 400 clinics anymore, like there's 50,000, 100,000 if I look global. And e-com's a hard business when you're selling pet food because they're big heavy bags at low margin, so I thought, well, digital is great because there's no freight involved, it's weightless, it's borderless, it's I know the sectors, so that's led into an opportunity now which I think is really exciting because it's new, AI and digital agents are completely new and evolving, and now we, there's no constraints as to borders and teams and market capacity. So
what are you working on at the moment?
So we basically looked at leveraging digital technology, whether it be digital humans, like human avatars, or AI agents, and creating a scalable, turnkey, white-labelled model so that vets could just plug it in and bang, they can have an AI agent assistant working for them, connecting them with their clients. So we identified the need that vets are very focused on what they're doing and they're not seeing the shifts in the customer trends. Customers want to interact digitally, but vets often don't know how to get there. So we built the current model. We used a platform called Ambit, and we built a sort of a scalable model on that so that we could actually do the hard work and 90% of it's the same, but then the last 10% can be white labelled and personalised to vets all around the world. So it was definitely built.
How does it work in real life?
So we basically, we give the vets a line of code and then they get their agent. They can plug it on their website or it can talk over their social channels. It can integrate with their practice management system. So we can have a 24/7 agent that can do service. So they make bookings, they can survey you, they can educate you, they can talk to you after you've been in to see how Fluffy's getting on, right back to your records, all the stuff that clinics are increasingly finding it's hard to do because they don't have the time, and clients don't want phone calls as a rule anymore. If they do, they can, but so connecting people digitally.
How does the agent show up to the customer after they've had like the service?
So we would 70. They sit on the website, but I think there should be a day when websites are obsolete. So you as a customer, if you're my customer, I should know what you need before you even know you need it, and I should be able to connect with you, and I should know who you are, and I should know who your pet is. So I would reach you by your preferred level of channel, which might be SMS, it might be email, it might be WhatsApp. So you will get a message from me. You click the link and bang, there's a discussion. It could be, right, you've just been in 2 days ago. Do you want to take a photo of your dog's wound? Do you want to make a booking? Is everything okay? Have you got any concerns? Are they taking the meds? Do you want to talk about anything else? And all that just gets written back into the vet's records. So a really useful tool, but it's also meeting customer. Nobody wants to be playing phone tag with your veterinary provider today, and also surveying you before you come in, so it reduces all that wait time at reception.
So it's not just the AI agent on the website having live chats. It
can be, but that's about 20% of what it does. Yeah,
because that comes in at the start of the customer journey.
It can be, but that would involve you saying, okay, I need my vet for XYZ, or I'm worried about blah blah blah. I would think it's better for you as a customer if you've got a text saying, we know you need XYZ, click this link and we'll sort it for you. And then we just throw all the AI we can into that, which is all on brand, speaking on behalf of that practice in that clinic. So we're very design-led. We're sort of looking at, we talk to our vets and they'll say, look, we're having trouble keeping up with XYZ. Good example was we had a clinic in Melbourne that is a specialist cat clinic, and they've got a feline behaviour specialist who will consult over cats with behavioural problems. So at the beginning of every consultation, they spend about half an hour asking where did you get your cat? Was it an orphan? Was it from a shelter? Have you got any toys? It takes forever. So now we know you're coming in for that appointment next Thursday, so you'd get a text or an email or WhatsApp, whatever you've already decided, the way you as a customer like being interacted, and it'll say, actually, let's actually run through these questions now and give you a whole bunch of background. Are you happy to take, drugs, mood-influencing drugs for your cat? So all of that's written back into the record. You haven't had to go to a website. You've been able to do it at night so that when you do get in front of the vet, then there's more time spent talking to you and less record taking. They're prepared, you're prepared,
Right.
the scene's set, and it's all happened at your convenience as a customer. So it's very...
So it's like an onboarding. Like
can be,
if you
or it
take
can be after you've been in.
aftercare.
Aftercare. It can be anything you like. So the beauty of what we're doing is we've thrown it out there and said, how do you want to do this, one of them is surveying your cat for symptoms of arthritis. Like, do you know whether your cat's arthritic or not? So we can easily build in a questionnaire and show you some videos of what an arthritic cat looks like, and then all of a sudden you have got an arthritic cat and you do want to make a booking. And that's all happened without any front desk time.
And how does that get triggered to be sent to the customer?
So we're relying on the vet's practice management system. So our niche is actually sitting on top of, say, their database. So
Right.
so every vet should have a record system in which they've got your details and your cat's details and when your annual vaccination's due, and if you've come in and they've typed their notes, they've got all that. And they should have your email number, and they should have your preferred, your cell phone, email address, cell phone. So they should have all of that. So we would just right off the back of that. So that will transport our technology to you.
And so the AI agent is reading all this information and personalizing it for the customer.
So we built it to scale. So the behaviour questionnaire that we've built once, we figured there's probably 300 feline behaviour specialists around the world. So they can all use the same questionnaire, or we can. That's a challenge, not sort of building too many. But when the agent hits you, it'll say, "Hi, I'm
such and such.
You've from
And it
Melbourne
says
Cat Centre."
it's AI, does it? Like it says I'm a robot.
Yeah,
do
I
you
think
often-
it's a really good point. We never want to pretend that
Yeah.
we're anything but it's a conversational flow. It's so we did have a practice that sort of said, wouldn't it be great if we could actually have an AI phone call to you as a customer? And then I'm starting to think, actually, I'm not sure whether that's such a good idea, because if you've gone to the trouble of answering the phone from the clinic to find out that it's a robot talking to you, I'd actually feel a little bit pissed off. You haven't, if you're going to take the time to talk to me and annoy me on the phone, at least go to the trouble of actually having a live person on the end
Real
of the
person.
phone. So this is designed for the people that they don't want to play phone tag, and you can answer this in your own time while you're having a coffee, during lunch, while you're at work and nobody can see that you're doing. So we're very much being design led. So I could see the need I could see the opportunity here. Like vets need this. We need to create a scalable solution. I don't know anything about AI or coding. So we looked for a platform called Ambit that let me as a vet during the pandemic sit there and write these conversations without any coding experience, and then started to gather a team around us that liked what we were doing. And then all of a sudden we got a lot of industry people interested, like the companies were interested in putting their product knowledge in there. And so we started off, which is me bootstrapping this in 2020, and now we're in 9 countries, I think. We've just gone into the UAE. We're in 15 to 20% of NZ clinics. But the US is our target, and now we've got a whole bunch of investors have come on board who are all interested in what we're doing, and we've really, we've got, I think one of the quotes that we had was, it's a great niche market, but it's huge, and the timing's good, and the team's right, and the tech's good. So but very much been built to scale after learning from pet doctors, for instance, how hard it is to make something like that scale without just buying. So the only way we could really scale Pet Doctors was to just keep buying other businesses. Like we could have gone to Australia and bought the entity that bought us.
Where do you see this going? I mean, what's the future? What does the future hold? You know, we've got AI agents now.
Yeah.
You know, what do you think?
It's a really good question.
What do you think is the next thing?
I think we are talking about AI-assisted professionals. I think knowing our market and knowing their stresses and understanding their fears and concerns and then building a solution in around that's essential, you know. So we don't see us as we can't replace veterinary nurses, we can't replace vets, but they're increasingly under pressure to be available 24/7 with more information than they can ever dispel. So I think we just need to understand that market. But I love the fact that it's just so big, you know, and it's borderless. So that's the exciting part. But when we started this, you know, nobody had heard of generative AI and RAG and LLMs. I hadn't anyway. So so what we're delivering now is completely different to what we were doing 3 years ago. So that's the exciting part. I can't tell you what we'll be giving in 2 to 3 years, but what we'd like to know, our core value is we know our cohort, and we need to connect them with whatever's best in class that'll help them. So we see ourselves as the turnkey connector to that. While they carry on with their main business, we can provide that solution in the middle, and it's it's a big market, so it's exciting.
And what sort of, how much is it worth, do you think, this market that you're operating in right now?
Sorry?
And what's the worth right now with AI agents and the work that you're doing?
The total addressable market for veterinary and software and engagement is projected to be $3.2 billion in 3 years' time, I think, which are big. So it's still a really niche market, but it's huge. The interesting thing is we can also say, well, actually, we own the platform, the technology. There are other professional verticals that are actually much the same, whether it be medical or dental or physio or optometry. So we can start.
I'm sure they're adopting that or thinking about adopting that at the moment.
Yeah, but are they leveraging the AI tech stack that we are and creating a scalable model? It's the interesting thing. Yeah. So that's staying curious.
Yeah,
I think
staying within your lane, or are you going to go to perhaps other avenues?
The good thing is now we've gone from it was just me bootstrapping this 18 months ago. Now we've got teams in London and all through New Zealand with a whole bunch of investors, and so going, it's just like a fast track, and the maturing of the company from being a startup to being bootstrapped to having a team, to having investors, to needing a board, to shareholders reporting. So it's that, and then ultimately, no doubt, an exit at some stage.
Yeah.
So it's interesting squashing. That was a 10-year, 11-year journey at Pet Doctors. It's like this is 10 or 11 months.
It's a different game, isn't it? Different kettle of fish.
But you bring bits and pieces of all of your previous learnings and together. Like I say, I've got a really good people person works alongside, who I know she's involved from day one, getting a fractional CFO resource in to help provide that commercial resource way before we can afford to employ a full-time one. But just learning from previous.
And the key is to finding good people.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah. What I found is if you've got a good idea and it's a good market, the people will come. There's no shortage of people wanting to jump on board, be on part. In fact, if we could afford them all, it would be great, but we can't. So we're in a good position at the moment, which is good because it's validating as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many more questions I want to have, but I'm going to end it at this. I just want to say thank you for pouring your heart and business ideas and insights and mistakes and good decisions and bad decisions and the whole vet world. It's so fascinating, and I'm sure the vets in New Zealand and around the world would find this conversation enlightening and inspiring, because I have found it enlightening and
It's been
inspiring.
a pleasure. Love talking about it.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Thank you.